The Kepler relay station hung in the void like a forgotten monument to something greater than anyone could remember. Commander Elena Vasquez stared at the structure through the observation window of the Terran survey ship Magellan and felt small in a way she rarely experienced. The station stretched across 50 kilometers of space, its surface covered in patterns that hurt to look at too long, as if they existed in more dimensions than human eyes were meant to perceive. 3 million years old, Dr. Marcus Chen said from behind her, his voice filled with the same awe that gripped everyone who saw the monitor for the first time. Give or take a few 100,000 years, Lieutenant Kyle Conquo added, checking the sensor readings that still made no sense, even after a week of analysis. Elena had read every report filed by every species that had studied the monitor over the past 2 centuries since its discovery. The Zirath Collective had sent their finest philosophers. The Quinn Federation had transmitted every mathematical proof known to their civilization. The Rel Unity had even attempted to commune with it using telepathic choirs. All had received the same response: nothing. Approach vector confirmed, the helmsman called out. Take us in slowly, Elena ordered, though she knew the monitor had never shown aggression toward anyone. The strange thing was that it had never shown anything at all except patient, endless observation. The Magellan drifted closer, and Elena could see the docking ports that dozens of ships had used before them, all marked with symbols from species long gone or still thriving among the stars. Atmosphere detected in the central chamber, Okonkwo reported. Same composition as every other expedition found, breathable for most oxygen-based life forms. Chen gathered his equipment, 3 cases of scanning devices and sample containers that Elena suspected would prove just as useless as everyone else's had been. She led the team through the airlock and into the monitor. The interior defied expectation in the same way the exterior did. Corridors stretched in directions that shouldn't exist, and rooms seemed larger inside than outside. The lighting had no visible source, yet illuminated everything perfectly. They found the central chamber exactly where the previous surveys said it would be, though each team described the journey differently, as if the station rearranged itself while maintaining the same destination. The core of the monitor dominated the room. A sphere of unknown material floated without support, its surface rippling with information in languages both familiar and utterly alien. Above it hung the counter that had fascinated and frustrated researchers for 200 years. 0 qualified responses logged. The numbers glowed in whatever language the viewer understood. Trick that every species had tried and failed to replicate. Beginning structural analysis, Chen said, setting up his equipment around the sphere. Okonkwo activated the linguistic decoder, though previous teams had already mapped 40,000 variations of the monitor's broadcast query. Elena walked closer to the sphere and felt a presence regarding her. Not hostile, not welcoming, just observing with impatience that made centuries feel like moments. The query is still transmitting, Okonkwo confirmed. Same pattern. Mathematical base, philosophical framework, request for response. What is the purpose of consciousness? Chen translated, though everyone on the team had memorized it long ago. Every expedition has tried to answer, Elena said. The Zirath sent their entire philosophical canon, Chen replied, scrolling through the historical logs. 40,000 pages on the nature of awareness, the role of thought in the universe, the destiny of sentient beings. The Quinn tried pure mathematics, Okonkwo added. Proof that consciousness was the universe observing itself. Equations demonstrating the necessity of awareness in quantum mechanics. The Rel claimed consciousness existed to achieve unity with the divine source, Elena remembered from the reports. They had spent 6 months in meditation before the monitor, broadcasting their spiritual revelations continuously. all rejected, all logged as 0. Elena felt frustration building in her chest. 3 million years this thing had waited and questioned, and somehow nothing anyone said was good enough. She had read theories that the monitor was broken, that it had lost whatever criteria it once used to judge responses. Other theories suggested the architects who built it had posed an unanswerable question, a cosmic joke on younger species. "There has to be something we're missing," Chen muttered, adjusting his scanners for the 100th time. "Maybe the architects were asking the wrong question," Elena said. The words came out before she thought them through, casual and tired after days of travel and preparation. "Maybe consciousness doesn't need a purpose," she continued, speaking more to herself than the monitor. "Maybe we're just here to see what happens next, to experience and wonder and not worry about some grand cosmic reason for it all." The sphere pulsed. Light flooded the chamber in colors Elena had never seen. Okonkwo shouted something, but Elena couldn't hear over the sound that wasn't quite sound, more like reality humming in frequencies beyond normal perception. The counter changed. 1 qualified response logged. Shen stumbled backward, his equipment clattering to the floor. Okonkwo grabbed the wall for support, as the sphere's rippling surface calmed to show new patterns, these ones clearly directed at Elena. "What did you do?" Chen whispered, but it wasn't really a question. Elena stared at the counter, her heart pounding. 200 years of research, thousands of experts, entire civilizations trying to answer. And she had just spoken like she was talking to a friend over coffee. "I don't know," she said honestly. The monitor's presence shifted, and Elena felt attention focusing on her with an intensity that made her want to step back. But she held her ground as symbols began forming in the air between her and the sphere. Not words exactly, more like concepts that her mind translated automatically. Query acknowledged. Response parameters satisfied. Initiating contact protocols. "Elena," Okonkwo said, his voice shaking slightly. "The monitor is broadcasting on every known frequency. The whole galaxy is going to know something changed." Chen had recovered enough to check his readings. Increasing. Structural integrity holding. Internal systems activating that weren't showing any energy signature before. Elena barely heard them. The monitor was communicating directly with her now, and the message was both simple and terrifying. Waiting period concluded. Species evaluation protocols engaged. Humanity has 30 cycles to demonstrate qualification. "What does that mean?" she asked aloud. "Previous respondent species failed assessment. Humanity will undergo trial. Prepare your civilization." The sphere pulsed once more, and Elena felt knowledge flooding into her mind. Information about the architects and their purpose, about why this monitor had waited 3 million years for someone to understand. The purpose of consciousness wasn't to serve some grand design. It was to exist authentically, to embrace uncertainty and wonder without needing cosmic validation. Every other species had answered with purpose, with meaning, with destiny. They had tried to justify existence. Elena had simply accepted it. And now humanity would face consequences she couldn't begin to understand. The Magellan's communication system crackled to life. "Commander Vasquez, we're receiving priority alerts from Earth Command, the Zeroth Collective, and about 40 other sources," the ship's communication officer reported. "They're all asking the same thing. What happened to the monitor?" Elena looked at the counters still glowing with its new number. 1 qualified response logged. "Tell them," she said slowly, "that humanity just passed a test we didn't know we were taking. And now the real examination begins." The galactic community erupted within hours of the monitor's activation. Elena watched the diplomatic channels flood with demands, accusations, and barely concealed panic as she stood in the Magellan's command center. 17 species have filed formal protests with the Galactic Council, Okonkwo reported, scrolling through messages that arrived faster than anyone could read them. The Zerath Collective is calling for an emergency session. They're scared, Chen said from his station, where he was still analyzing the data from their encounter. The monitor has been dormant for as long as recorded history, and now suddenly it wakes up because of something a human said. Elena understood their fear better than they probably realized. For centuries, older species had studied the monitor, had dedicated resources and their finest minds to understanding the architect's question. And then humanity, barely 200 years into galactic society, had stirred it. Stumbled into the answer by not really trying. Incoming transmission from Earth Command, the communications officer announced. Admiral Zhang, Priority Alpha. Elena straightened her uniform, though she knew the gesture was more about composing herself than military protocol. Put him through. Admiral Zhang's weathered face appeared on the main screen, his expression grave. Commander Vasquez, I need you to explain how you managed to activate an alien structure that has resisted all attempts at interaction for 200 years. Sir, I spoke to it, Elena said, knowing how absurd that sounded. Everyone has spoken to it, Zhang replied with barely restrained frustration. No, sir. Everyone has lectured at it, Elena corrected respectfully. They sent prepared answers, philosophical treatises, scientific proofs. I just talked to it like it was a question worth considering, rather than a test to pass. Processing this, and now it wants to evaluate humanity. It says we have 30 cycles to prove we're qualified, Elena confirmed. 30 cycles of what? I believe it means 30 days, based on the temporal markers it transmitted, Shen interjected. 30 days to demonstrate that humanity deserves whatever comes after passing this trial. Deserves what, exactly? Zhang asked. Elena felt the knowledge the monitor had placed in her mind, information that was simultaneously clear and overwhelming. The architects seeded consciousness throughout the galaxy millions of years ago, she began. They created species, gave them awareness, and then waited to see what would develop. The monitor was left behind as an observer, programmed to ask one question: what is the purpose of consciousness? Every species that answered focused on justification, why consciousness exists, what grand role it serves in the universe. Catching on to what Elena had learned. They all needed existence to mean something beyond itself. And you said what exactly? Zhang prompted. I said maybe we're just here to see what happens next, Elena replied. That consciousness doesn't need a cosmic purpose. That experiencing and wondering might be enough. Zhang rubbed his temples. So by not claiming we're special or destined for greatness, you convinced an ancient alien machine that we are special and destined for something. The architects wanted to find a species that could accept existence without requiring validation, Elena explained. A civilization mature enough to embrace uncertainty. And now we get tested on that maturity, Zhang concluded. What form will these tests take? The monitor didn't specify details, Elena admitted. But it emphasized that authenticity matters more than perfection. That previous species failed by trying to appear ideal, rather than showing genuine struggle toward improvement. Another officer appeared behind Zhang on the screen. Sir, the Zerath ambassador is demanding immediate access to Commander Vasquez. They're claiming Earth must surrender her for proper diplomatic processing. Elena felt her stomach tighten. Tell the Zerath that Commander Vasquez is a Terran officer operating under Earth jurisdiction, Zhang said firmly. Now patch them through. I'll handle this. The screen split to show Ambassador Keleth of the Zerath Collective, their chitinous features arranged in what Elena had learned to recognize as barely suppressed aggression. Admiral Zhang, humanity has interfered with a galactic heritage site and triggered unknown protocols, Keleth stated. Commander Vasquez must be transferred to neutral territory for questioning. Commander Vasquez performed her duties as a survey officer, Zhang countered. She had no prior knowledge that speaking near the monitor would trigger any response. Ignorance is not innocence, Keleth shot back. The monitor's activation threatens the stability of established galactic order. Established order that kept the monitor locked and useless, Chen muttered quietly enough that only Elena heard. She understood now why the Zirath were so agitated. For 200 years, they had been among the most vocal researchers of the monitor, had published extensively on their failure to achieve a qualified response, and now humanity had succeeded where they had not. The monitor has chosen to evaluate humanity, Zhang said calmly. That choice is not ours to reverse, and not yours to interfere with. This evaluation could have consequences for all species, Keleth argued. What if humanity fails? What if the monitor's response endangers the galaxy? Then we'll deal with those consequences together, as the Galactic Council was designed to do, Zhang replied. The transmission ended abruptly from the Zirath side. Zhang turned his full attention back to Elena. You need to return to Earth immediately, he ordered. Whatever this trial involves, you'll need to coordinate with people far above my authority. Sir, I'd like to request that Dr. Chen and Lieutenant Okonkwo accompany me, Elena said. They were present for the initial contact, and their expertise could prove valuable. Zhang nodded. Granted, but Commander, understand that you're about to become the most scrutinized person in human history. Every decision humanity makes in the next 30 days will be examined through the lens of this trial. Elena swallowed hard. I understand, sir. After Zhang signed off, Chen approached her station. The monitor is still transmitting, he said. Not the original query anymore. It's sending out new information. What kind of information? Asked. Historical records, Chen replied, his voice filled with wonder. Descriptions of other species that received qualified responses throughout galactic history. How many? Okonkwo asked, joining them. 7, Chen read from his display. 7 species, over 3 million years, received qualified responses from monitors like ours. There were dozens of these stations scattered across the galaxy. Were? Elena caught the past tense. All the other monitors went permanently dark after their assigned species failed the trial, Chen explained. This is the last active monitor in known space. So 6 species before us got qualified responses and then failed their trials, Elena said slowly. What happened to them? Chen pulled up the historical data, his expression growing somber as he read. They didn't cease to exist, if that's what you're worried about, he said, but they were denied access to whatever the architects left behind, some kind of knowledge or technology that would have advanced them beyond current galactic capabilities. They failed by trying to game the system, Okonkwo observed, reading over Chen's shoulder. One species attempted to fake unity by suppressing all dissent. Another tried to hide their flaws rather than address them. The architects wanted genuine growth, not performance, Elena realized, and now humanity has to demonstrate that we're capable of that growth. She looked out at the monitor, still glowing with its new status. 1 qualified response logged. Somewhere in that ancient structure was hope that consciousness had finally evolved to understand its own value. And humanity had 30 days to prove that hope was justified. The weight of it pressed on Elena's shoulders, but beneath the pressure was something else. Excitement, perhaps, or curiosity about what came next, which, she supposed, was exactly the attitude that had gotten them into this situation in the first place. Set course for Earth, she ordered, and someone start compiling everything we know about species that failed their trials. If we're going to pass this test, we need to learn from everyone who didn't. Earth orbit felt different when Elena arrived 3 days later. Ships from a dozen nations crowded the approaches, and the usual commercial traffic had been diverted to make room for military vessels on high alert. They're expecting a war, Okonkwo observed quietly. They're expecting something, Elena corrected. Whether that's war or revelation, nobody knows. The Magellan docked at the rebuilt Geneva station, and Elena barely had time to grab her personal effects before security escorted her team to a high-speed shuttle. 40 minutes later, she stood in a conference room deep beneath the United Nations headquarters, facing representatives from every major Earth government and several galactic species. Secretary General Amara Okafor opened the session with characteristic directness. Commander Vasquez, the Monitor has begun manifesting what it calls trial scenarios across Earth and human colonies, she said. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Elena accessed the data feeds on her tablet and felt her breath catch. In the past 72 hours, 7 distinct events had occurred. An unknown ship had deposited massive resource caches on 3 colony worlds, enough rare minerals to eliminate scarcity for decades or start wars over distribution. First contact scenarios had appeared with a primitive species on the edge of human space, species that all analysis suggested shouldn't exist, yet matched no known biology. Engineered disasters requiring global cooperation had struck simultaneously on 2 continents, not deadly, but demanding coordinated response. The Monitor is testing us, Chen explained, when Elena remained silent, processing the implications. Each scenario examines a different aspect of our civilization. How we handle sudden abundance, how we treat less advanced species, whether we can cooperate under pressure. And we're failing, said Ambassador Liu, from the East Asian Coalition, pulling up footage of riots on Tau Ceti 4, where colonists were fighting over the resource caches. We're struggling, Elena corrected firmly. There's a difference. Enlighten us, Liu challenged. Elena stood and brought up the historical records from the Monitor. 6 species before us received qualified responses, she began. All 6 failed their trials, and every analysis shows the same pattern. They failed by trying to appear perfect. 1 species suppressed all internal conflict to present a unified front. The Monitor rejected them for inauthenticity. Another hid their resource conflicts and pretended they'd achieved post-scarcity civilization. The Monitor detected the deception. She pulled up specific examples. The Vren Collective forcibly rewired their population's brains to eliminate disagreement. The Monitor classified this as abandonment of consciousness rather than maturation of it. So what are we supposed to do? Asked General Morrison from the North American Defense Command. Be honest about our struggles and show genuine effort to improve, Elena said. The Monitor doesn't expect perfection. It expects authenticity and growth. That's a nice philosophy, Morrison replied. But how does it translate to action when colonists are killing each other over mineral rights? We intervene, we mediate, we acknowledge the problem, and work towards solutions, Okafor said, understanding dawning in her expression. We don't pretend it isn't happening, and we don't force a false peace. Chen highlighted another data point. Something else. They're not just testing us in isolation. What do you mean? Elena asked. The first contact scenario with the primitive species, Chen explained. Every decision we make is being observed, not just by the Monitor, but by the galactic community. How we treat a less advanced civilization will influence how other species view humanity. The Zirath are already using our response to the resource conflicts as evidence that we're not ready for advancement, Okonkwo added, pulling up diplomatic traffic. Ambassador Kelleth appeared on one of the screens via recorded message. Humanity demonstrates the same resource-driven conflicts that have plagued younger species throughout history, Kelleth stated. Their qualification was clearly an error in the Monitor's programming. They want us to fail, Morrison said. Of course they do, Elena replied. We're a threat to the established order. If we pass the trial, we gain access to architect technology that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Then we need to approach this strategically, Liu argued. Carefully manage each scenario to present the best possible outcome. No, Elena said, sharply enough that everyone turned to look at her. That's exactly what the failed species did. They managed and controlled and presented curated versions of themselves. The monitors saw through it every time. "So what do you suggest?" Okafor asked. Elena took a breath, organizing thoughts that had been forming since she first touched the monitor's consciousness. "We do what we've always done. We mess up, we fight about it, we eventually figure out something that works," she said. "The colonists fighting over resources are wrong, but that conflict is real and human. We send mediators, we establish fair distribution systems, and we accept that some people will resist, and that's part of the process. Asking us to show our flaws to an entity judging our worthiness," Morrison said incredulously. "I'm asking us to trust that our genuine struggle toward improvement is more valuable than a false image of perfection," Elena countered. Okafor stood, and the room quieted. "Commander Vasquez makes a compelling point," the Secretary General said. "Every attempt to game this trial has failed historically, which suggests the architects valued something we might overlook in our desire to succeed." "They valued truth," Elena said. "The truth that consciousness is messy and conflicted and uncertain, and that's exactly what makes it valuable." The next week tested that philosophy severely. The resource conflicts on Tau Ceti IV escalated before peacekeepers could establish order. The first contact scenario went sideways when a colonial administrator ignored protocols and the primitive species fled in terror. The engineered disasters revealed corruption in supply chains that delayed humanitarian response. Every failure was broadcast across galactic networks. Every mistake became evidence for species arguing humanity wasn't ready. But something else happened too. The peacekeepers who finally brokered peace on Tau Ceti IV did so by acknowledging both sides' grievances rather than imposing external solutions. The colonial administrator, who botched first contact, filed a public apology and established a protected zone around the primitive species. The corruption revealed by disaster response led to reforms that strengthened rather than broke the affected governments. "The monitor's readings are changing," Chen reported during a status meeting 2 weeks into the trial. "Changing how?" Elena asked. "The scenarios are evolving based on our responses," he explained. "When we handle something poorly, it doesn't mark it as failure. It presents opportunities for correction." The resource conflicts. After the initial violence, a new scenario appeared offering mediation resources. When we took the mediation seriously, that avenue developed further. Okonkwo pulled up the monitor's data streams. "It's like the trial is adaptive," he said. "Not a pass-fail test, but an ongoing evaluation of how we handle challenges and learn from mistakes." "That's because consciousness itself is adaptive," Elena realized. The architects didn't want to find a perfect species. They wanted to find one capable of growth. But even as humanity struggled forward, the Zirath Collective was preparing something that would test Elena's theory to its breaking point. Intelligence reports filtered through UN channels. The Zirath were moving military assets toward human space. Ambassador Kelif made thinly veiled references to ensuring galactic stability. And Chen discovered something in the historical records that made everything more urgent. "Elena, you need to see this," he said late one night, his face pale on the video call. "The species that came closest to passing their trial, the Morath Unity, they failed in the final test." "What was the final test?" Elena asked, though part of her already suspected. "How they responded when another species tried to sabotage their trial," Chen said quietly. "The Morath Unity retaliated with overwhelming force, destroying the interfering civilization. The monitor logged it as proof they hadn't truly evolved beyond violence as a primary problem-solving method." Elena felt ice form in her stomach. "The Zirath are going to attack us. And how we respond will determine whether humanity passes or fails." The attack came during Earth's 18th day of trial. Not missiles or energy weapons, but something far more insidious. The humanitarian supplies heading to disaster zones across 3 continents vanished from transport ships. Investigation revealed Zirath hackers had rerouted the cargo to empty space, making it appear that human logistics had catastrophically failed. "Thousands will die without those supplies," General Morrison reported grimly, "and the Monitor will log it as our failure to handle crisis response." Elena stood in the UN command center, watching real-time feeds of communities cut off from aid. Children in makeshift shelters, medical facilities running out of basic supplies, rescue operations grinding to a halt. "The Zereth are making their move," Ambassador Liu said. "They've issued a statement to the Galactic Council claiming this demonstrates humanity's infrastructural incompetence." "Sabotage?" Okafor asked. Chen worked frantically at his console. "I can trace the hack signatures, but proving Zerath involvement officially will take weeks. We don't have weeks. The Monitor's evaluation drops every hour those people go without aid." Elena felt rage building in her chest. The Zerath were gambling that humanity would either fail to respond in time, or would retaliate so aggressively that they'd fail the trial's final test. "We have two choices," Morrison said, pulling up military readiness reports. "We can launch a counterstrike against Zerath infrastructure, disable their ability to interfere further. Or we can," he paused, clearly struggling with the alternative. "Or we can what?" Elena prompted. "Or we can redirect every available resource to helping those people and deal with the Zerath later," Morrison finished. "That's not weakness. That's strategy. The Monitor is testing how we prioritize." Interjected. Response to sabotage versus response to humanitarian need. "The Morath Unity chose revenge," Chen reminded them. "They had the technological advantage and used it to eliminate the threat, and failed the trial for it." "So we let the Zerath get away with murder?" Liu demanded, "because some ancient machine thinks that makes us enlightened." "No," Elena said quietly, an idea forming. "We expose them while focusing on our people." She turned to Chen. "Can you package the hack evidence in a format the Galaxy Council can't ignore, even if it's not complete?" "I can have something in an hour," Chen confirmed. "Do it," Elena ordered. "Then we broadcast everything, our discovery of the sabotage, our evidence, and our decision to prioritize humanitarian response over retaliation. We show the galaxy exactly what the Zerath did, and exactly how we're choosing to respond." Okafor understood immediately. "Let the court of galactic opinion judge them, while we demonstrate our values. Their betting will either fail to help our people, or will attack them," Elena explained. "We do neither. We help our people first, and trust the truth to be its own weapon." The next 6 hours were chaos. Every transport ship that could fly was redirected to disaster zones. Military vessels dropped their combat loads to carry medical supplies. Private corporations opened emergency reserves at government request. And Chen's evidence package went out on every galactic channel simultaneously. The Zerath response was immediate and panicked. Ambassador Kelleth appeared on diplomatic networks, claiming the evidence was fabricated. But other species, particularly those who had suffered Zerath interference in the past, began asking pointed questions. "The Quinn Federation is calling for an independent investigation," Okonkwo reported. "Suspended trade agreements with the Zerath pending review." "They're getting exactly what they deserved," Morrison said with satisfaction. "But our people are still dying," Elena countered. "Have the supply ships reached the disaster zones?" "First wave is landing now," a logistics officer confirmed. "Medical teams are deploying. Food distribution is beginning. But Commander, we have another problem." Elena closed her eyes briefly, bracing for whatever new crisis had emerged. "The Monitor is broadcasting again," the officer said. "It's transmitting directly to the Kepler relay station and to Earth simultaneously." Chen pulled up the transmission. "Trawl parameters compromised. External interference detected. Evaluation suspended, pending resolution." "It knows about the sabotage," Okonkwo said. "But what does evaluation suspended mean?" Elena felt the Monitor's presence touch her mind again. That same patient observation she'd experienced at first contact. Images flooded her consciousness. The Morath Unity destroying their saboteurs. Other failed species collapsing into chaos when their trials were compromised. and something else, a question directed specifically at her. How will humanity respond to those who would deny them advancement? She spoke aloud, though only Chen and Okonkwo could hear in the crowded command center. "You're asking if we learned anything," she said. The presence intensified. Previous species sought only their own elevation, punished interference as personal offense. True maturity requires understanding that all consciousness struggles. "You want to know if we'll help the Zirath even after they tried to destroy us?" Elena said. Chen stared at her. "Elena, what are you thinking?" "The monitor isn't just testing how we handle sabotage," she explained. "It's testing whether we understand that. The Zirath are afraid, terrified of being left behind while humanity advances." "They don't deserve our help," Morrison interjected, having overheard. "They actively tried to make us fail, which is exactly what a scared civilization would do," Elena argued. "The architects wanted to find a species that could see beyond their own advancement." Okafor stepped forward. "Commander, are you suggesting we offer to share whatever we gain from passing the trial?" "I'm suggesting we offer the Zirath another chance at qualification," Elena said. The room went silent. "You want to help them pass the same trial they're sabotaging us in?" Lu said incredulously. "That's insane." "That's exactly what a mature civilization would do," Chen said slowly, understanding dawning. "The architects seeded consciousness throughout the galaxy. They wouldn't want just one species to succeed." "But how?" Okonkwo asked. "Failed to get a qualified response decades ago." Elena remembered the knowledge the monitor had shared with her. The monitor asked what the purpose of consciousness was, she explained. The Zirath answered with elaborate philosophical frameworks about unity and purpose. But what if we could help them understand the answer differently? She pulled up the communication channels. "Get me Ambassador Keleth." "Elena, they're not going to listen," Morrison warned. "Maybe not," Elena agreed. "But we have to try, because the trial isn't about proving we're better than them. It's about proving we understand that we're all struggling together." Keleth's image appeared on screen, their features arranged in defensive aggression. "I have nothing to say to you, Commander Vasquez," the ambassador stated. "Your accusations are baseless, and your attempt to sabotage Zirath credibility will fail." "Ambassador, I'm not calling to accuse you," Elena said calmly. "I'm calling to offer you something." Keleth's confusion was visible even across species barriers. "Offer me what?" "Another chance to answer the monitor's question," Elena replied. "Not as enemies competing for advancement, but as species trying to understand consciousness together." "You failed your trial," Keleth said coldly. "The sabotage proves humanity is unworthy." "Maybe," Elena acknowledged. "But that sabotage came from fear. Fear that the Zirath would be left behind, that you'd miss something important." "I understand that fear, because we all feel it." "You understand nothing," Keleth snapped. "Then help me understand," Elena challenged. Why did the Zirath answer the monitor with philosophical frameworks about unity and cosmic purpose? Keleth was silent for a long moment. "Because consciousness must serve a function in the universal order," the ambassador finally. "Because without purpose, awareness is meaningless." "But what if meaning comes from the experience itself?" Elena suggested gently. "What if consciousness doesn't need to serve a grand function? It just needs to be, to wonder, to grow," Keleth said. "An answer born from humanity's youth and philosophical simplicity." "Maybe," Elena agreed again. "Or maybe it's an answer that only makes sense when you stop trying to justify your existence and just accept it." She leaned forward. "Ambassador, humanity didn't succeed because we're better or smarter. We succeeded because we were willing to embrace uncertainty. And now I'm asking if the Zirath are willing to do the same." Keleth's image flickered. "Why would you help us after we sabotaged your trial?" "Because the purpose of consciousness might just be to see what happens when we help each other instead of competing. Because Maybe that's what the architects really wanted to find, not a single perfect species, but species capable of growing together. The transmission ended abruptly. Chen touched her shoulder. That was either brilliant or catastrophic. We'll know soon enough, Elena replied, watching the monitor's suspended evaluation status, hoping that humanity's answer was still the right one. The Zeroth fleet arrived at the Kepler relay station on day 27 of humanity's trial. 15 warships, against the small research vessels and defense platforms Earth had positioned around the monitor. They're powering weapons, Morrison reported from Earth Command. All ships are at battle stations. Elena stood on the bridge of the Magellan, returned to the monitor at her own request. Hold position, she ordered the small human fleet. Do not fire unless fired upon. Elena, they have overwhelming force, Okonkwo warned. If they open fire, we can't stop them from destroying the monitor. I know, Elena said quietly, watching the Zeroth formation approach. But violence isn't the answer to this test. Chen worked at his console. The monitor is active again. Evaluation status changing from suspended to, he paused, reading the display with disbelief, to final trial stage. Flooded Elena's consciousness. Humanity has demonstrated growth through crisis. Zeroth Collective has demonstrated fear-based aggression. Final evaluation commences. Parameters, species response to existential threat. It's watching how both species handle this moment, Elena realized aloud. Everything we've done, everything the Zeroth have done, it all comes down to what happens next. The Zeroth fleet stopped just outside weapons range. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then a single shuttle detached from the flagship and began approaching the Magellan. Ambassador Kelleth is requesting permission to board, communications reported. Elena felt her heart race. Permission granted. 10 minutes later, Kelleth stood in the Magellan's conference room. The Zeroth ambassador looked diminished somehow, their usual aggressive posture replaced with something almost resembling uncertainty. I consulted with the Zeroth Council after our conversation, Kelleth began. Your offer was presented, debated, ultimately rejected by majority vote. Elena's hopes sank, but she kept her expression neutral. Then why are you here? Because I chose to reject their rejection, Kelleth said. The fleet was sent to destroy the monitor before humanity could pass the trial. A desperate final attempt to prevent your advancement. I convinced the fleet commander to delay long enough for me to speak with you personally. Why? Elena asked. Because your words troubled me, Kelleth admitted. For 200 years I have studied the monitor, dedicated my life to understanding the architect's question. I answered with everything the Zeroth believed about purpose and meaning and cosmic order, and received nothing. Then you arrive and speak casually about uncertainty and wonder, and the monitor responds immediately. It made me question everything I thought I understood about consciousness itself. Chen pulled up his analysis. Ambassador, when the Zeroth answered the monitor, what were you feeling? Kelleth seemed confused by the question. Feeling? Were you confident, uncertain, afraid? Chen prompted. Were you answering because you believed it, or because you thought it was what the monitor wanted to hear? Kelleth was silent for a long moment. We answered what we believed consciousness should mean, the ambassador finally admitted. What it must mean for our existence to matter in the vastness of space and time. But you never considered that mattering might not require cosmic justification, Elena said gently. That consciousness could be valuable simply for existing, for experiencing, for growing. How can existence without purpose be valuable? Kelleth demanded, but the question sounded less like challenge and more like genuine confusion. How can existence, with imposed purpose, be authentic? Elena countered. If consciousness only matters because it serves some grand design, then we're just tools, rather than beings worthy of respect in ourselves. The architects wanted to find species who understood that consciousness itself is the point, not what it accomplishes or justifies. Keleth moved to the window overlooking the monitor. If I go back to my fleet and tell them this, they will remove me from command and proceed with destroying the monitor. If I try to answer the monitor again with this new understanding, I risk another rejection and the humiliation of my entire species. Yes, Elena said simply. That's the uncertainty consciousness requires, the willingness to risk failure for the possibility of growth. The Zeroth ambassador turned back to face her. And you would help us, even after we sabotaged your trial, attempted to destroy everything you've worked toward? That's what it means to see what happens next, together, Elena replied. Because maybe the architects wanted to find species who understood that all consciousness struggles, and that struggle is more bearable when shared. Keleth stood motionless for several seconds. Then the ambassador activated a communication device. Fleet Commander, this is Ambassador Keleth, the Zeroth said. I am ordering immediate withdrawal of all combat vessels. Ambassador, we have our instructions from the Council, the commander's voice responded. I am countermanding those instructions under emergency diplomatic authority, Keleth stated. The Zeroth Collective's future depends on cooperation, not destruction. You will be removed from your position, the commander warned. Likely, Keleth agreed. But I will have acted with authenticity rather than fear, which I am beginning to understand matters more. The Zeroth fleet held position for tense minutes. Then slowly, one by one, the warships began powering down weapons. Fleet is withdrawing, Okonkwo reported, with barely concealed relief. Keleth approached the monitor's communication interface. How do I do this? The ambassador asked Elena. Just talk to it, Elena said. Not as a test to pass, but as a question worth considering. Keleth stood before the sphere and spoke. Monitor, I answer your question not with the certainty I once possessed, but with the doubt I have learned to value. The purpose of consciousness may be that it needs no purpose beyond itself, that awareness and experience and growth are sufficient justification for existence. I do not know if this is correct, but I know it is authentic to what I have come to understand. The sphere pulsed. Light filled the chamber, and the counter changed. 2 qualified responses logged. Trial complete. Humanity status, qualified. Zeroth Collective status, qualified. Evaluation protocols concluded. Elena felt the monitor's presence expand to encompass both her and Keleth. Knowledge flooded into both their minds simultaneously. The architects had seeded consciousness across the galaxy, knowing that most would fail to mature beyond survival-driven purpose. They had left monitors as patient observers, waiting for species that could understand existence, didn't need cosmic validation. And they had left behind gifts for those who succeeded. Technology that would enable faster-than-light travel beyond current limitations. Techniques for post-scarcity resource generation. Methods for consciousness transfer and life extension. Understanding of physics that would unlock dimensions beyond normal perception. But more than technology, they had left a message. The architects themselves had faced the same question and answered the same way. Had transcended not because they achieved some grand destiny, but because they stopped needing one. The gifts are available to both our species, Keleth said, processing the same information. The monitor makes no distinction in what it offers. Because advancement was never about competition, Elena realized. The architects wanted to find species capable of growing together. Shen pulled up new readings from the monitor. It's broadcasting a new question to the galaxy, he reported. A message to all spacefaring civilizations. The transmission played across all frequencies. Now that you are ready, what will you become? 1 million years until next evaluation. 2 species qualified to guide others forward. We're not just receiving knowledge, Elena said slowly. We're being entrusted with helping other species reach qualification. The trial doesn't end. It evolves into responsibility. With an expression, Elena was learning to read, as respect. Can our species work together toward this? I think we have to, Elena replied. The architects didn't want one perfect civilization. They wanted a community of consciousness capable of supporting each other's growth. That only works if we're willing to include everyone, even those who opposed us. The monitor pulsed once more and began transmitting the architect's gifts to both Earth and the Zeroth homeworld. Knowledge that would reshape both civilizations. Technology that would enable wonders. And the understanding that consciousness itself was the greatest wonder of all. Not because it served some cosmic purpose, but because it existed and wondered and grew. And now 2 species would carry that understanding forward. To help others embrace the uncertainty. To share the gifts of the architects. To see what happens next. Together. At the stars. And felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph or relief, but simple curiosity about what humanity and the Zeroth and all the species to come would create together. The monitor had logged 0 qualified responses for 3 million years. Now, it had 2. And the real work was just beginning. The purpose of consciousness, Elena understood now, was to create more consciousness. To elevate others, rather than ascending alone. To accept that existence needed no justification beyond the experience of existing. The architects had known this. Now humanity and the Zeroth knew it too. And across the galaxy other species watched and wondered if they too could embrace the uncertainty. The monitor waited patiently, ready to ask its question again and again, until every consciousness in the universe understood that wondering was enough, that growing was enough, that simply being was enough. The counter glowed with its new status. 2 species qualified. But Elena knew it wouldn't stay at 2 forever. Because that was what consciousness did. It spread, it grew, it lifted others up. And maybe, just maybe, that had been the purpose all along.